So welcome to everybody to the NC ASA Professional Development Webinar Series, and thank you for attending. My name is Susan Simmons, and I'm the president of the North Carolina chapter of the American Statistical Association. Our chapter is devoted to providing our members with opportunities and events for networking and collaboration with others in the area of statistics and data science. A few of the upcoming events that we have planned are the virtual career fair will be on Tuesday, April 13th. We encourage as many of you that can attend to please join us on that day. The registration link is active, and I will send it to you all in the chat when I am during Elizabeth's talk, in case you are interested in doing that. I want to say a big thank you to our sponsors that we have already for the career fair: Apt Associates, Duke Clinical Research Institute, Duke University Department of Statistical Science, the United States EPA, FHI 360, GI Therapeutics, NC State University's Institute for Advanced Analytics, RTI, SAS, Sciome, Vive Healthcare, and Westat. So thank you so much for your generous support of the career fair. And again, we look forward to those of you that can attend. Also be on the lookout for our next social that will take place on Monday, May 10th. And we do have another webinar scheduled that will take place on Friday, May 7th with Ricky Tharrington from SAS, and that will be on model interpretability in machine learning. Last, before I turn it over to Elizabeth, I just want to mention that we do currently have our accepting applications for the Student Travel Award. The deadline is March 31st. And students can get up to $250 to attend a conference or workshop, and that also includes virtual. I will also include that information in the chat as well once I turn it over to Elizabeth. But before turning it over to her, I want to introduce our amazing speaker we have for today, Elizabeth Manshard, who is the Associate Director of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Information Access and Analytical Services Division, and she's an adjunct associate professor in the Department of Statistics at North Carolina State University. Elizabeth is a former president of this chapter, and she actively serves on committees and executive boards within the ASA. She's originally from California, and she received her PhD in statistics from UNC Chapel Hill. Prior to joining the EPA, Elizabeth held 2 National Science Foundation postdoctoral fellowships in environmental statistics and was a visiting assistant professor in the Department of Statistical Sciences at Duke. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them in the group chat, and Elizabeth will address those questions as she does. I mean, some she'll probably address throughout and some at the very end. On that note, Elizabeth, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I will stop sharing.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan. So let me share my screen, and does everyone see a calming beach view?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And then if I hit slideshow, it should pop on over. At least it did last time. Okay. Fantastic. Okay, thank you so much, Susan. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to speak with everyone today. And as Susan mentioned, I have worked with NCASA in the past and ASA in various capacities, and it's such a great organization. And I'm just very excited to be talking with you all today. So communication and leadership skills. Let's think for a minute about what that means exactly. And I want to mention that I believe Susan sent out some materials in advance to those that registered for the webinar. And those are sets of activities that we will be referring to some of those throughout the presentation today. And I want to encourage feedback via the chat, or if you have the opportunity to unmute and say something, that'd be great. And it's also, there's some activities there for sort of reflection on your own time, should you choose to do so, just kind of things to think about, and some sort of real life situations that have come up, and sort of ways to think about communication and leadership. So that was what Susan sent out. And the first slide of that, I believe, are the discussion questions that we'll touch on throughout the presentation. I just want to mention those logistics so you know what you have in front of you. So So communication and leadership. So when I started thinking about pulling these two topics together, I've done several sets of presentations on various professional development topics, including for NCASA's Mentoring and Career Development Workshop a couple of years ago. And they were kind of done as modules. So I had these sort of separate topics on goal structuring and networking and branding and communication, et cetera. And I really believe that communication and leadership go together. And as I was pulling these topics together from different sets of materials that I had, it just became more and more apparent that they really are hand in hand. It's hard to talk about leadership without talking about communication, et cetera. So today we'll touch on verbal presentation. Writing is absolutely a crucial skill as well. But moreover, this all sort of leads to how we can become leaders in our field. So I'm going to start with some material that's based on a talk I gave at JSM a couple of years ago. What's your point? Flipping the paradigm for communication in science. And what if I told you that I think that we have been going about communication in science upside down? So why do I think this? So who am I? Susan mentioned I'm Associate Director of EPA's sort of data science division. This is a role more on the IT side of data science. And I have an absolutely amazing team. We host a suite of analytic and geospatial tools that are used across the agency. And we do a lot of sort of database framework development and cloud development, et cetera. And I came into EPA as a statistician. And I've worn a lot of other hats as well, as Susan mentioned again. I've been at all three of the big basketball schools here in North Carolina, so I cheer for all the teams and a couple of postdocs. I've also had several positions in industry, and including as a consultant. I worked at SAS for a while. I also worked at Fair Isaac. If you've heard of your FICO score, that's Fair Isaac and Company. And so what I've noticed across government, academics, and industry, while these are different settings, there's varying goals and different considerations across each of these sort of three types of organizations. There are common themes, absolutely, in communication. And the goal of communication, of course, is understanding. However, more and more lately, you have 7 to 20 seconds to engage your audience. So hopefully I've done so as we kick this off. And when we think about that, and you think about Twitter and sound bites and Facebook and all of those social media platforms that we have, and just everything that's vying for everyone's attention, and we think about that 7 to 20 seconds to engage your audience. And then we think about the fact that scientists tend to communicate very differently than the general public. We communicate differently with each other. And then when we lay that information, we tend to communicate very differently than the general public. And this is different than how others may absorb information. And this is true for the public, the media. It's also true for decision makers, which as leaders in your field, you may be communicating with any one of these particular groups. So when we think about communication in science, you often think about collaborative work. You have scientific colleagues, maybe there's technical people that you work with that are maybe not scientists in your field. This is people you communicate with day to day. Maybe you're having client conversations as a statistician or a data scientist. And these are extremely valuable and absolutely critical skills to think about when you think about understanding the problem, when you think about asking the right questions of your colleagues, of your clients, et cetera, explaining the results and adding value-added visualizations and analytics, and considering the expertise of other disciplines. So again, sort of folding this all into collaborative work, extremely valuable, absolutely critical skills. However, we are not going to talk about those today. That's kind of a different set of skills than sort of thinking about how we communicate with others. So I'll just mention that a good consulting class and engaging professor is, I recommend Emily Griffith, another former president of NCASA, did an excellent job with consulting courses, et cetera, to talk about those types of skills. And that's a different type of communication that's very vital and takes its own attention and skill building as well. But what I'm going to focus on today is communication with basically decision makers. So when you're talking with your senior management, when you need to have discussions with a decision maker, whether that's someone in your company, it's a vice president, maybe that's someone in government, maybe perhaps that's Congress, perhaps you're reaching out to the media and the public to relay some information about your work and your finding. And making your point in these settings often doesn't fit the traditional paradigm that's often found in academic settings and research talks, or even in collaborations and consultings. So I'll lead with a quote from Grant Wellers, the VP of Research at Optum United Health. And he said, the communication, his PhD in statistics, by the way, and he said, communication is consistently the area of greatest need of improvement in data science and statistics. And he said this to me in the hallway at JSM a couple of years ago. And I said, Grant, that's amazing. I completely agree. I talk about this all the time. Can I quote you on that? And he said, absolutely. So why do I think that we've been going about it upside down when we think about, again, academic settings and traditional research papers and talks? So let's think about the traditional paradigm of how we might present research, how we might present our findings. So we go in, whether we're giving a presentation or we're writing a journal article, et cetera, and we lay out all of the background and the history and the research that's been done before. This is all very important, right? We are building on our research, our topic of interest. Perhaps we introduce formulas, so we write out a proof and we show some evidence of why this method is important and how it works. Then because we're interested in relaying our work, we show some new work, some developments in the field that we've been able to put into place. And then we lead to the results. And results can have a variety of different meanings. So perhaps we are relaying an analytical result, some data visualizations, perhaps we're explaining how to win the stock market, right? Perhaps we've developed a new theory. So we're writing theory for theory's sake, and that is what we're showing as the results of our sort of traditional academic research in our traditional paradigm. So what in this framework is of interest to managers and decision makers? So let me talk to you for a moment about an example that came up on my first year at my job at EPA as a statistician 6 years ago. This was my first big project at my new job, and it was a year long. There were months of discussions, analysis, more discussions, more analysis, graph it that way, graph it this way. I want to understand how it from this angle, etc. Ultimately resulting in a journal paper. Yay! And so, we're all very happy with this work. We think it relayed a very important scientific message about public health and air pollution, etc. And so, write up this journal paper, feel very fulfilled, and we've gotten the message across. So one day, my boss comes into my office and she says, "Give me one bullet on this." To which I said, "What?" And those of you who know me perhaps know the brevity is not my strong point. So this really turned things on its head. And I thought, how on earth can I take this amazing work that really points to the importance of understanding our health, our air quality, and what's going on in the world around us? But I needed to think about what is of interest to managers and decision makers. And so when you send something up the chain, you have to think about what ultimately is their goal. And there's a reason why they are called briefings, right? So your aim is to have something that is generally brief. So you are not only aiming to distill down your work, your research, your results, but you're often bringing together multiple and sometimes disparate sources into what you hope is a coherent and concise message. And I'll say you may spend a lot of time doing this, by the way. Again, you may be doing this verbally, and you may be writing this up. So perhaps you're asked for a report, perhaps you're asked for a one-pager. We're really big on one-pagers in the government. And perhaps you're asked for an executive summary that might be one paragraph. So I'm going to turn to our first sort of discussion question. And so if you want to pop something in the chat. So what would you think would go, quote unquote, up the chain? So if you're sending something up to your management, to a decision maker, what information would go up the chain? Okay. So I see big accomplishments. Yes, absolutely. Info needing immediate action. Absolutely. Bottom line up front, the bullet. Perfect. I like these. Yes, absolutely. Hi, Nancy. Great to see you. Great to see everyone. So absolutely, when we think about the traditional paradigm, we're often thinking about presenting out the results, which can absolutely be important. But what we need to keep in mind is that the aim for the decision makers is to make a decision. So they are looking to make a decision. Perhaps it's a decision on how to spend money. Perhaps it's a decision on public policy. Perhaps they're going to put some guidance or rules or laws even in place. Perhaps it's a new feature or a product or an innovation that the company is going to deploy or put into place. So what we need to think about is flipping that paradigm. You may be asked to advise on the decision. So you need to start with what you think is relevant information for that decision. Now that requires you to start with an understanding of the decision that needs to be made and present what is relevant to that decision first. So present your point. Someone in the chat, I think, had written, Robert wrote the bullet. Absolutely. So what is the bullet? What is relevant to that decision that's going to be made? Now, this is not a mystery reveal, right? We're not sleuthing around trying to solve a murder mystery. It's not a big build-up situation. You want to relay information quickly and accurately to whoever needs to make the decision. Now, in that context, perhaps you're also presenting the results, right? So you may present what needs to be made for the decision and also present some supporting results along with that decision. Perhaps that's in the form of metrics. Perhaps that's some risks that might be associated with the decision. Perhaps it's a return on investment that might be realized from whatever decision is going to be made. Usually, the rest of that pyramid, the rest of that paradigm is not presented at the briefing. You need to have justification ready. Perhaps there's a paper in the background. There's supporting materials in the background, documented, it's reproducible, etc. But rarely is it sent up the chain in a briefing. So there are generally two kinds of briefings. So we touched on the decision briefings, and there are often informational briefings as well. So upper management decision makers may want to learn about a particular topic or program that is being run, or something that may be an option for the company, et cetera, and they want to learn more about that. And I'm going to reiterate that writing is absolutely a critical skill, because again, you may be asked to present this verbally, or perhaps in a one-pager, a two-pager, et cetera. So in that case, we simply start with the understanding. What is it that you want them to understand? So again, it's not a mystery, big reveal, build up, the way that we sometimes see in academic talks as they're laying everything out. You want to tell them what you were going to tell them before you tell them, and then tell them. So I think that's sort of quoting Barry Nussbaum, the former ASA president. Tell them what you know, what they hear, that they think that they hear, that they think that you know, et cetera. So get the point across. Start with whatever it is that you want them to understand, and whatever information is needed for the decision that needs to be made. So I think that we can take this type of paradigm into the scientific realm as well. So let's think about the last time that you went to an in-person poster session, right? So this idea has already started to take off in the scientific community, but let's think about that last poster session that you want. And what is the goal of that poster session, right? Is it to learn everything about every project with a poster at that poster session? Is it to learn everything in your discipline? Is it to try to absorb someone's life work in 3 minutes while standing on a concrete floor, waiting for it to be time to go get dinner? I don't think so. I think the point of a poster session is to find out about new things about which you may want to learn. So this is a new paradigm for scientific posters introduced by a Michigan doctoral student, Mike Morrison, proposed this poster design. But the idea is you get your point across. You have 7 to 20 second soundbite on your poster, right? You put your point up front, and then off to the side, perhaps you have a little bit more detail. You have an intro, you have a little bit of methodology, and perhaps you have some of the results. And then you have a place where you can go, you scan, very fancy technology these days. scan to find the corresponding research paper or more materials, etc. So should you wish to take that deeper dive, then you absolutely are able to do so. But the point is, this perhaps would start a conversation, right? So many times you go up to a poster session or you go to a research talk, and it is just someone trying to attempt to have you absorb their life's work, their dissertation, etc., while standing at the poster or sitting in the colloquium. And that just is not how most people absorb and communicate information. So let's think about the broader ways that people communicate. So here's another discussion question. So if you are, think about what are the tools over the last 50 years for communication in science, in general, in the work setting, with your family, whatever it is. So if you want to enter it into the chat, I'll give people a few minutes to do that. Oh, and I do see poster sessions are for networking. Absolutely, I am a big fan of networking. I touch on that later. I have entire modules on how important networking is, etc. So great point there as well. So again, any ideas on ways or tools for communication over the last 50 years? So I'll go ahead and kickstart it. Oh, I do see email. Hi, Lindsay. And archive, absolutely, Twitter, phone, MS Teams, etc. Perfect. So we've already seen, just in what's been put in the chat, multiple different types of communication and platforms. And so here, just sitting down for 10 minutes the other day, I just kind of threw some communication tools that I could think of in 5 minutes onto the slide to generate the conversation. And one of the things I want to point out is how things have changed over the years, right? There's always a new technology. There's always a new way to communicate. Again, in the office, with your colleagues, with the scientific community, with the public, etc. So the tools that are highlighted in red here, I am just curious as to how many people on this call may have actually used some of those. So I did have an answering machine. I haven't for quite a while. I don't know that I've ever used a typewriter. And then when we think about something like the radio, you know, it's not just for playing our favorite tunes. That used to be a main method of communication and how people got their news about world events and how they communicated across the distances, etc. Perfect. Photocopied, absolutely. Writing letters to grandmother, perfect. And then I also wanted to point out transparencies. Who remembers your professors giving presentations with transparencies? Perhaps you did yourself as well. Haven't seen one of those in a while, but there's definitely a lot of different ways and tools for communicating over the years. So what that points to is a big topic in communication, or a big consideration in communication, is knowing your audience. So I want to point to, if you are in a professional workplace, which most of us probably are, and if you are leading and communicating, there is a good chance that different generations are talking and are working together. So if we just think about the older generation in the workplace, and we think about all of the experience that they have, the younger generation coming in with new technologies and new methods, etc., they all bring something to the table. However, they often communicate very differently. So I'm going to point you to what I thought was an amazing reference, a book called Sticking Points by Hayden, and it talks about the 4 generations that are currently in the workplace and the events that sort of shaped their life and the various ways that they operate in the workplace, one of which is communication. It's a really fascinating read, at least the first half. I'm not gonna lie, second half's a little dry, but it's really interesting to think about how the older generation in the workplace communicated versus what's happening now with sound bites and texts and Twitters and cell phones, etc. So if you are communicating, oh, I want to point out the pencil here on the slide points to, there is a take-home exercise for this as well, for you to think about a scenario where there might be different generations and different levels of experience communicating in the workplace. Oh, that's great. Someone popped in the chat that there's a Gen Z update to sticking points. I did not know that. Thank you for letting me know. I will definitely be on the lookout for that. So as we think about knowing our audience, knowing who we're communicating with and who we're working with, and we think about if we're briefing up the chain, we want to also think about communication in their context. How will they best digest the information? And that's really true in all settings, right? So we want to know our audience. We've talked a little bit about the customer and the collaborator, and we've talked about management and decision makers, and we'll certainly come back to that. But there are also additional considerations for talking to the public and with the media. So it is incredibly crucial in all of these scenarios to know your audience. So if you remember this example, my first big project at my new job, year long, tons of analysis, journal paper, months of discussions, etc. And I was asked for one bullet to send up the chain. And then public relations came in and said, can you explain the methodology at a 4th grade level? To which I said, what? So I'll take a step back here and say, of course, there are pages and pages and pages of heavily complex scientific research and results that go on at EPA. And this is not about dumbing down that science. And of course, there are appropriate avenues in which someone may wish to read that science and look at those scientific papers and discuss that and build on that, etc. This is about education. It's about FAQs, frequently asked questions that may occur on websites or may pop up on mobile apps. For someone who wants to quickly check something like their air quality index and know whether or not they can take their asthmatic kid to soccer practice without having to wade through research and formulas and charts and graphs. They just want a very simple explanation about what's going on and how it affects their life, right? So, just saw the communication in the chat about the 3rd grade level. Yes, absolutely. So we need to think about the fact that scientists tend to communicate very differently than how the public absorbs information. So this is based on a talk that I heard by Joseph Romm. He holds a PhD in physics from MIT, and he served as acting assistant secretary of the US Department of Education back in the 90s. So he's clearly very credentialed. However, he told the story about how he became very interested in communicating about science, climate change, the science of climate change, and found that he wasn't understanding why, when he would go out and talk to the public, they weren't, or generally when the public was getting this information, why it wasn't having an impact. Why are they not absorbing this information that he thought was very clear to everyone? And one of the things that he settled upon is, or I should say his area of research is the idea of language intelligence. He has a really interesting book called Language Intelligence, Lessons on Persuasion from Jesus, Shakespeare, Lincoln, and Lady Gaga. So the whole gamut there. And it really looks at why word choice matters and the structure of scientific language, which is something that we definitely need to think about in our discipline as statisticians and data science. So again, a discussion question. How do you think that scientists tend to communicate? So how would you characterize that? And on the flip side of that, how do people who resonate with the public communicate? So either or, if you want to pop that into the chat. Scientists are overly detailed, tons of jargon, absolutely. Verbose, dry, formally, absolutely. Build our points piece by piece, then come to a supported conclusion, systemly, lots of p-values. So yes, absolutely. So everyone is basically touching on these ideas that scientists tend to lay out a bunch of background and research, pages upon pages. They're aiming to convince you with all of these studies and this research. Scientists use big, complex words. There's reasons for this. We often want to convey nuanced and scientific meanings, and different words have different meanings, and words become big because we've run out of small ones, I guess. And so for us, that's a very valid way to communicate. We also say things once. We want to there's a lot to get through, right? We want to get through all of the background, all of the facts, etc. And then we make our decisions based on facts, or at least what we believe to be the facts, and what we find from this research and how everything is laid out. And then we turn to the public. And in general, they communicate very differently. So they tend to communicate in sound bites, instant messages. Remember the 7 seconds that you have to engage your audience. There's a reason for that. They use short, catchy words, and there's always a hook, right? If you think about sayings that resonate, there's a hook to those sayings. And Ram talks about that a lot, and he looks a lot at political words. This was written prior to the 2016 administration, but and it talks about repeated messaging. And the public makes their decisions based on stories and relationships. So how do they relate to what that they're hearing and what they're being told? So our job, when we as scientists are communicating to the public, is to combine these ideas. So we want to relay our point. We want to do it in clear, concise, and the simplest terms that we can. We're not looking to dummy it down, right? But we are looking to be clear and concise. We want to repeat our message. And again, this touches back on the idea of branding, which I'm a big fan on, and again, have entire other talk about branding ideas. And we want to tell stories. We talk about that a lot as statisticians and data science. We want to tell stories about the data, stories that are illustrated by the data, stories about the research, about the findings. And I will point to Regina Nuzzo, who is with the American Statistical Association. She gave a great talk at Women in Data Science Day a couple of weeks ago for the DC chapter, where she talked about the art of storytelling when relaying scientific information. So I definitely encourage you, if you ever have a chance to hear Regina Nuzzo talk, to do so. It's a really fascinating way to consider how we can better communicate. So on a related idea, if we're looking to sort of distill down the science, maybe some of you have heard about the website Thesis in a Sentence. So it encourages people to put the technical full top title of their thesis and then distill it down to just a sentence. So here are two. We have the relationship between profanity and honesty, and an entire thesis on that, an entire thesis on remediating religion and spirituality on the small screens. So how do they distill that down? Well, the first one, relationship between profanity and honesty, swearing is caring. So that's very catchy, I think, and really kind of distills that down. And remediating religion, influencers are going to influence even when God is involved. So very catchy, distilled down to a bite. I'm not quite as clever, but here is my attempt to distill down my dissertation topic. It's very long, scientific words, lots of statistical things going on there. But from my perspective, sure, the code is faster, but the theory took 4 years. So an exercise is, can you soundbite your work? If anyone would like to throw that in the chat, wouldn't want to put anybody on the spot to do that. But feel free to do so. And if I see those come in, I'll let people know. But think about that, because that's important. Can you relay your life's work or your most important project or whatever it is that you're working on that you may need to have a decision made on, or you want input on, or even you're just having a conversation at a party or with your in-laws, etc. Can you relay it in 5 to 10 words? Can you relay it in 7 seconds, 7 to 20 seconds? This touches on the idea of elevator speeches, which is probably a concept that everybody has heard about. And I will say there's an expansion on that. There is a scientific elevator speech that perhaps that you may want to give to a colleague, someone you work directly with. And there's the colloquial elevator speech. If you're trying to talk with a friend, perhaps you are talking with the public. And you want to be able, as a leader, to do this not only for your work, but for your team's work as well. And again, this comes back to the idea of branding. So if you're branding something, you're using clear, concise language, you're repeating something, you want it to stick, you want it to have a hook, 5 to 10 words, something that you can say in 7 seconds. Yes, someone posted in the chat, in other words, what is the title of your movie? Absolutely. I talk about our big project at work, the power of the platform, It's just what I repeat over and over again. We have a really big, it has a lot behind it, but you try to get that out there as your brand for you, as well as a leader. You think about how to brand your team. So as we think about all of this as it relates to data science, statistics, etc., in addition to soundbiting, that is a useful, absolutely tool, but it's not the only tool that we need. We also need an understanding. We need to be able to translate what it is that we're doing. So this turns to the role of Analytics Translator. And this is kind of similar to if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, does it really make a sound, right? If you run the most amazing analytics ever and best visualizations, are you able to translate that to decision makers, to the public? And McKinsey identifies the Analytics Translator as the most important new role in analytics. It was in 2018. And so let's think about that. We think about analytics leadership. Look at some recent job postings. So there was a search of over 600,000 analytics and data science job postings for skills keywords that came out of those job postings. And the top 2 keywords were communication and interpersonal skills. Absolutely, we should have an understanding of the quote unquote data science that's going on. But if we are becoming leaders and we are communicating and having an impact with our work, communication and interpersonal skills are the most valued skills in the field. And a senior VP of data science posting had these keywords. They're looking for someone to lead, extract valuable insights, translate, communicate to the executive team, and collaborate with subject matter experts. So notice that it does not say Kubernetes, it does not say machine learning, it does not say data visualizations, all of which are absolutely critical and key in our field. But we're talking about leading these teams and what it means to have that impact in the field. When we think about scientific leadership, I saw an amazing keynote talk by Dr. Sullivan, former NASA astronaut. Can't get much higher than that. Haha, that's my little joke there. She was the former chief scientist at NOAA. She is the president and CEO of the Cossey Science Center in Columbus, Ohio. And she tagged communication and conversation as the new social technology. And it is the most important human technology. So she encourages scientists, don't just use big arcane words. The next frontier is scientists building language and conceptual frameworks for lay users, right? That's how we distill the science, and our work has an impact and decisions are able to be made. So think about this again with leadership and communication. So we also need to think about communicating up versus communicating down or across within our own teams. So we've talked about scientific versus decision-making conversations and with the public, et cetera. And we also have very different conversations within ourselves. Staff conversations are very different than management conversations. The speed can be very different as well. So we want to see how in these different contexts, these different settings. Scientific colleagues talk, they research, they think, they analyze, and they write journal papers, et cetera. However, when you're having a conversation with management, you don't have time necessarily to do all of that. You're turning around briefing materials, one-pagers, et cetera, perhaps needed by COB, close of business. Happens to me all the time. Possibly needed in an hour, right? So there's a pencil there, again, indicating that there is an exercise on this that I promise you actually happened to me, looking at different needs for a cloud platform setting and what all of these terms needed. And I will point out again, my degree is in statistics, not in data frameworks, not in cloud computing. I had not heard of any of these terms that are in that exercise before it came to me, and needing some materials to upper management within a couple of hours. So pulling together all of these different sources of information, often very quickly, it's very important, again, mentioning staff conversations, that you're having those continually going on, that you are listening, you're learning and understanding from those that you are leading, and that you trust and respect their expertise. I absolutely rely on the expertise and advice of my staff, and their technical expertise is extremely valued. So when I think about leading the team, what is of interest to managers and decision makers? An example in a program that my division runs, a platform, has amazing capabilities. It's moving technology forward. It's helping the entire organization. It's relatively inexpensive given how much things cost these days. But there's an ask, right? We need funding. We need resources to support this. So I need to be pulling together all of these types of communications in order to actually make an ask, right? So what is of interest in this ask? So it turns to another discussion question. So what do you think that leaders consider when they are going into the ask of upper management, of decision makers on behalf of their team? Any ideas about what you would need to consider as a leader when you go into the ask? Overall, does it fit with overall strategy? Absolutely. Cost and resources? Absolutely. Timeline and feasibility? Why it matters? Absolutely. So everyone is touching on those key concepts: who, what, why, how. I'm sure there are other keywords that could be thrown in there as well. Why are they making this ask? How do we frame this ask? Is it new functionality? Are we saving the company money? Is there going to be a return on investment? Does it fit, as someone said, with the overall objective of the organization? What materials do we want to bring? What materials might we need? It's a little bit different question, but what materials do we want to bring into the room, quote unquote? And then who do we want to have in the room? We want to have probably the communicator. And the idea is, again, another great talk at Women in Data Science Day a couple of weeks ago. Julia Buffington talked about leading data science teams, and she said, you sell the vision. Absolutely, that's something I've said myself. And you need to go into the room and sell the vision of whatever it is that you have. And so when you think about who, what, why, how, and you think about who to bring into the room, you think about communication and who is on your team. You have to keep in mind you often have limited time or opportunities to make this ask, to get your message across. And so it's not about explaining every detail. It's about getting the funding, maybe perhaps that you need, getting the decision made. So when you think about who the communicators are on your team, it's not necessarily the smartest team member or even the team lead, although it absolutely could be. It's not necessarily the person who did all the work. It's about the person who can explain the overall vision, the overall goal, and the aim, and how it benefits the organization. And it's not about lack of trust in the team. In fact, it's the opposite. You trust your team to get you the information that you need. You trust them to help you understand. You do the work yourself to understand as well, in order to know what you need to bring into the room to get the message across. So you are working on your team's behalf in order to get them whatever it is that they may need. So we think about this in our own careers as we start to look towards how we can take leadership roles. I mean, you can take leadership roles absolutely as scientists, phenomenal scientists out there as leaders, innovators, etc. Often working with policymakers, decision makers, on par, etc. Collaborators as well. Perhaps you're leading those collaborators, or they are leading you, and you need to work together. And then perhaps we're interested in stepping into those roles as decision makers ourselves. One form of leadership. And as we think about the form of leadership, I definitely think it is worth mentioning that there is a difference between leadership versus management, or quote unquote, the boss. So management probably is a formal position of some kind. Generally, you're managing people or projects. You have been quote unquote put in charge somehow. Often the manager is dealing with logistics, all the fun stuff like time cards, etc. Leadership, I would offer, is different, and it's arguably harder than that role. And it can be found formally, absolutely, and it can also be found organically as you step up and into leadership roles in your own organization. So maybe your goal is to move into a formal leadership position with a formal title and formal responsibilities, perhaps a managerial role, etc. But leadership opportunities are everywhere, and you certainly don't need a title in order to take a leadership role. So as we think about that, and we think about goal structuring and how it might relate to leadership opportunities, I think there's a couple of key points here. There's the idea of having a career versus having a job. So whatever someone is paying you to do right now is probably your job. But you want to think about your career holistically over your lifetime. And as you think about various roles or projects or opportunities that you can take on, how are you framing your own career? In fact, how are you branding that career for yourself as well as for others? Hopefully you are building on your own interests. And I definitely encourage that, because you will be best at whatever it is that interests you, right? And when you think about skill building, I think it's important to think about career building versus skill building. So is it vital that we all are absolute experts in machine learning? I hope not, because I'm not. I understand enough about machine learning to understand what my team is doing. I've implemented a couple of examples. I would not call myself an expert. That is one skill in the toolbox. However, there's skills that I've been able to build over my career, and hopefully others over their career, that are different than these sort of perhaps traditional skills, and also outside of just whatever job it is that you are doing. You want to be thinking about how to build your own career. So again, my formal training is in statistics. I do virtually no statistics day to day in the job that I have now. I did make a word cloud a couple of months ago. It was very exciting. But those are not the skills that I rely on in my current position. I work with people, I work with projects, I work with quote unquote selling the vision and sort of understanding, hopefully, how the data science that we are doing in our division will best move the agency forward and best operate under best scientific principles, et cetera. So all of that is skills I've built over my career, and that's what I would encourage people to do, is think about career building versus individual skill building with some aim of becoming an expert at a particular thing, which of course could absolutely be its own route. But when you're thinking about holistically, there's lots of different avenues that one can take in data science. So when we think about data science leadership, some of you know Polly Mitchell-Guthrie. She used to be located here in North Carolina. She was the co-founder of Women in Machine Learning and Data Science North Carolina. And she's now the vice president of industry outreach and thought leadership. And she has a really great article available in the references. She says that leaders grow complex skills like business domain and interpersonal relationships. And note that she's, what I focused on here in her article is that data science leaders focus on how to frame these business problems. So note that that does not say that they are sitting down and solving the problems. They're thinking about how to frame those to help the technical people that they are working with abstract that business problem into a model, into something that an analytics team can tackle. And then the key bullet here is the leader coaches the team to explain the results to business leaders, right? Again, that's the ultimate goal, is communicating the work that we're doing. So as we move into leadership throughout our career, what do we expect? Fame, fortune, and fun? Perhaps. Let's see. So fame, perhaps there is some. So there can be some fame that comes with various positions, including within your own network. Perhaps you expand your network. You rely on your network perhaps to get where you are, and you also help your own network along as well. And people, of course, hopefully you're leading people. In fact, it takes people to lead people. If no one is willing to follow, then you are in fact not leading. And I truly believe that you can learn something from everyone that you work with. And also pointing out that perhaps there's some fame, but with fame comes that responsibility, right? You are the face of whatever it is that you are leading. You are associated with it, and you are ultimately responsible. We're not throwing our team under the bus, right? At least in the eyes of those that are involved, it is, as a leader, your job to sell the vision and to communicate that vision as well. Fortune, perhaps. Generally, as you go up the ladder, you tend to make a little bit more money. But if you're only aiming for the money, then you are missing out on quite a bit, on the relationships, on the rewards. You should choose to do what you believe in, whatever it is that you find to be rewarding. And then fun. Yes, absolutely. So again, I love working with people. I believe, again, you can learn something from and enjoy something about everyone that you work with. And also, it is important to realize that being a leader can be hard work. So there's a lot of consideration. Sometimes you're talking with people up the chain about the big picture, and sometimes you're working with your staff and you're down in the details and the weeds on the logistics. And you need to know how and when to get in there and do the dirty work, and how and when to delegate. And good leaders often do a lot of the work behind the scenes themselves. And the leader should not feel that they are too good to do the dirty work. And by dirty work, I literally mean dirty work. So thinking back to Emily Griffith and I lugging tables around at the NCASA dinner, in our blazers and high heels, et cetera, and stacking chairs and all of that, getting things ready for the community and to be able to lead that event. And so as we think about these opportunities and the fame and fortune and fun that may come with them, where do we find them? And I'll point to NCASA has some great opportunities for leadership. So you can think about external leadership roles. You can think about taking leads on various projects that already exist within your organization. I would definitely encourage people to ask for responsibility and to take the initiative to implement your great idea. So I would put out there that you don't necessarily need permission to become a leader. And if you, to quote Dalai Lama, if you think you are too small to make a difference, then try sleeping with a mosquito. And so absolutely get your idea out there. So just to take on a personal example, when I first started at EPA, I came in and I did what they asked me to do, and I was working on the projects that they needed done. But I also realized that there was this amazing community of statisticians at the universities here in North Carolina, and we could have this mutually beneficial relationship. And so I started coordinating with the different universities on statistical consulting projects from projects within my division that students could work on. I love working with the students. I always learn something. Everybody always approaches, as statisticians we know, everyone always approaches the problem slightly differently. And so that was a way to kind of implement an idea, take on responsibility at work on the statistics framework. As I became more interested in leadership and communication, I was having a lot of sort of quote unquote hallway conversations around work about, well, this is the way it's always been done, but let's think about these other ideas that could be implemented for leadership at the agency. And so I started a discussion group that met once a month called Non-Traditional Leadership Perspectives. And I encouraged others that I worked with to bring their ideas. And so each month we had a different person present on whatever topic that they would like to present on, whether it was lead a discussion, whether it was talk about a book. For instance, that's how I learned about the book Sticking Points, as a colleague came in and talked about this great book that she had read. Another colleague who kicked it all off started with a book called Breaking Through Bitch, which talks about how women are often perceived differently than men when it comes to attributes that are considered good qualities for leaders. And so also an interesting read in terms of how we can start to frame the words associated with leadership to apply to everyone. So assertive versus aggressive and terminology like that. So I've learned quite a bit from that, and an idea that I implemented, learned a lot from, also gave me an opportunity to learn. So with that, I will almost end with a quote from one of my favorite Peloton instructors, Robin, who says, "Get up that mountain and then find your next mountain." So whatever your mountain may be, I believe that to lead is to learn, and you should always be, I'm always trying to learn. You want to learn about your organization, your role within that organization, your projects, most importantly, your people. Absolutely the most important part of the team. I believe to lead, you must also listen, which is a part of learning, and listen to your team and understand what's important to them in their work, outside of work as well. And I truly believe that the best leaders are caring and are curious. they care about their people and their projects and their work. And they also are curious about all of those things. They want to understand their people and their projects and their work. And they're also caring and curious about what is beyond each of those with their people within their team that they are leading. So I will just note that the references that I've mentioned throughout the discussion today are available in the handout that was provided. And I will say thank you. Oh, I see someone loves Robin. Excellent. So thank you so much. And hopefully, if there are a few questions, we have a few minutes for questions.
I have a quick question. There was a really good comment in the chat about trying to incorporate, so you mentioned about how communication is so important for statistics and data scientists.
Absolutely.
How do you see this being incorporated into programs or degree programs in the undergraduate or graduate programs?
I think it would be phenomenal if there was a concerted effort in order to do that. I do think there has been sort of a bit of a changing of the tide. I think it's been an important focus of ASA over the last few years, various presidents coming in and making that part of their initiatives. And I personally think that there could be, an entire course, if not more, on the different types of communication. I mean, again, I've mentioned that there are consulting courses in most universities now, which I think is phenomenal, and something similarly themed about how do we talk to people outside of the scientific community. And I think it's important to practice, which is why I provided the exercises, because I think it's great to hear someone talk, and hopefully it's a little bit inspiring and motivating, but you also have to put it into practice, right? So having a venue or an avenue where you can do that. In a classroom could be a place, also get out there, right, and do it. But I think that absolutely there is a place for that in the university sort of construct. Yes, and I would ask you, Susan, as a professor yourself, what how do you see that as something that's a need within universities?
Most definitely. And in fact, at the institute where I teach, that's ingrained in our curriculum. Dr. Egan Morgan, I saw, was here.
Oh,
and
great.
Yeah, and that's an integral part, and we completely agree. I was loving your talk. I was like, 100% is what we agree with, and we have it integrated throughout the whole curriculum, like presentations, writing, reports, just ways of communication.
Right, great, fantastic, yes. I did go through sort of a traditional academic program myself, and the big focus was writing for other academics, speaking to other academics. And I will say also that I have found that I have really relied on the skills that I developed in my opportunities to teach at the university level, as a graduate student, also in other capacities, as a postdoc, as an adjunct, et cetera. But that absolutely to have that in a way, every time you teach a class, you're giving a little mini briefing, right? And so you're pulling together information on a topic, you're becoming comfortable enough with that topic to write it out, to explain it to someone else, et cetera. And so I feel I'm reasonably comfortable speaking in front of people. I've no aim to be, Britney Spears or anything up there and quote unquote performing, but speaking with people and hopefully engaging people is definitely a skill that can be cultivated in the teaching setting. Absolutely. Yes, and I see in the chat that someone mentioned, Jennifer mentions your message ties closely to data literacy. Absolutely. So I didn't get too much of a chance to talk about what kind of what it means to really be data literate, and really what it means to understand sort of all of the aspects of data. That's just kind of a different type of talk, but absolutely same types of concept. And then I see in the chat, leadership requires fostering trust. Absolutely. And the stakeholders as well. Absolutely. And glad you like the caring and curious ideas. So any other suggestions? So yes, absolutely.
Other questions? Elizabeth, could you tell us a little bit? I know you mentioned, and I know you're on the board, the ASA has made some strides in terms of communication. You want to tell us a little bit about what the ASA is currently doing?
Well, I'm struggling to remember off the top of my head exactly what the topics were that the presidents have put out, but what is statistics? You know, there was that framework. So how do we communicate what statistics is? There's the what's going on with this graph that's the ASA is coordinating with is it the New York Times in order to sort of spread that idea of data literacy and statistical literacy out to the general public, that's specifically aimed at students. The ASA has also put a focus on professional development and career development, which I think there's several sort of webinars, courses, etc. I'm on the Committee for Career Development. So if you are on the AMSTAT pages, it's communityamstat.org/CCD for Committee on Career Development. I believe it comes up if you search within the ASA pages. And that just points to various resources. We're always expanding the material available on that page. So if something's not on there that you think should be, please do let me know. But that points to, there's some leadership series that are run throughout the ASA. Gary Sullivan came to NC ASA and actually sort of pioneered that with respect to doing a one-day course with NCASA. I want to say back in 2018. That was a great experience. And so they have some modules on that. And then they also have some modules on different aspects of communication and in statistics and data science. So I'd point to those resources. And I believe that ASA should continue to build on those resources and on those topics. So, any other questions? I very much appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you so much. Thanks for everyone's great comments in the chat. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. This was great. And look for the webinar on the YouTube channel. It should be happening soon.